I had spent 40 years working, sacrificing, and building a life that I believed would finally be mine when retirement arrived. For 4 decades, my days had belonged to schedules, responsibilities, deadlines, and other people's needs, so when I finally retired, I imagined waking each morning without an alarm and deciding for myself what the day would become. I thought retirement would be the beginning of freedom. I never imagined that only 2 months later, my daughter-in-law would arrive at my kitchen table carrying a color-coded binder, a perfectly organized schedule, and the confidence of someone who believed she had the authority to decide what happened to the rest of my life. The binder struck the table beside my porcelain teapot with a heavy thump, and something about that sound told me this was not going to be an ordinary family conversation. My daughter-in-law, Celeste, remained standing instead of taking the chair across from me. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored blazer, clicked an expensive pen open, and looked at me with the polished expression of a manager about to present a new company policy. My son Nolan sat nearby with his coffee, turning the mug slowly between his hands while avoiding my eyes. Through the kitchen window, sunlight rested gently over the garden behind my Ohio home, illuminating the tomato plants I had spent weeks nurturing. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside, I could already feel that peace slipping away. Marissa, Nolan and I reviewed our family finances last night, Celeste announced. With my promotion and Nolan's longer hours, we need dependable childcare. We cannot keep paying for services that do not match our schedules, and we certainly do not want strangers looking after Leo and Maya. She opened the binder. Inside was a frighteningly detailed timetable. Every weekday from early morning until evening had been divided into blocks. School pickups, grocery shopping, lunch preparation, soccer practices, homework, meals, household errands. My name appeared across the top, as if I were an employee assigned to a permanent department. Celeste smiled as though she had just solved an impossible problem. You retired 2 months ago, she continued. Your schedule is completely flexible now, so this arrangement makes perfect sense. You can help with the children, prepare meals, and handle the afternoon responsibilities. It will save our family thousands of dollars. I stared at the pages without touching them. I had expected my retirement to feel like an open road. Celeste had apparently mistaken it for an empty calendar waiting for her handwriting. You spent quite a lot of time organizing this, I said quietly. She smiled, believing I was impressed. I slid the binder back toward her without opening another page. But I did not agree to any of it. Her expression barely changed. That was the first sign that she did not understand what I was saying. She seemed to believe that because I had retired, my time had automatically become available to her family. By Thursday, the assumptions had turned into calendar invitations. My phone filled with appointments I had never accepted. Leo's dental appointment appeared on my schedule. Maya's gymnastics drop-off appeared next. Then came a grocery list containing every ingredient for a casserole Celeste expected me to prepare for their Friday dinner. I looked at those notifications and remembered something my late husband, David, used to tell me. Quiet people often get mistaken for agreeable people. David had understood that difference. Nolan, unfortunately, had not. My son had inherited his father's gentle nature, but somehow missed the firmness that made his father stand up when something was wrong. Whenever Celeste spoke, Nolan nodded. Whenever she made a decision, he accepted it. When the consequences reached me, he looked uncomfortable but remained silent. One afternoon, Nolan came to my house claiming he needed to borrow my hedge trimmer. He stood near the kitchen island, shifting his boots nervously. Mom, did you see the calendar invitations Celeste sent? I saw them, I answered. I did not accept them. He looked genuinely confused. Why not? You are retired now. You are home most of the time. That sentence hurt more than Celeste's binder. He looked around my quiet house and saw free hours. He did not see the 40 years behind those hours. He did not see the early mornings, the long shifts, the years I had spent managing landscape installations and greenhouse inventories, or the sacrifices David and I had made while raising him. He saw an available mother. I looked directly at him. Nolan, being home does not mean my time belongs to somebody else. He lowered his eyes. I knew then that polite explanations were not going to be enough. The following Monday, I decided to show my family what retirement actually meant. At exactly 7 in the morning, when Celeste's schedule said I should have been driving to their house to prepare lunches, I locked my front door, put on my walking shoes, and drove downtown. Several weeks earlier, the local conservatory director had asked whether I would teach a recurring class on native plant restoration. I had hesitated because I wanted an unstructured retirement. But now I realized that my freedom needed to be more than an idea. I accepted the position. That morning, I arranged soil samples, prepared teaching materials, and stood in a bright classroom surrounded by adults who genuinely wanted to learn from my 40 years of experience. For the first time since retiring, I felt something I had almost forgotten: excitement about my own future. During lunch, my phone began vibrating across the table. 3 missed calls from Celeste. 2 from Nolan. Several messages followed. The first asked where I was. The next complained that Celeste was late for an important presentation, and nobody was available to watch Maya before the school bus arrived. I finished my sandwich before responding. I am downtown finalizing my conservatory teaching schedule. I will not be available on weekday mornings. The response was immediate. When I arrived home that afternoon, Celeste's SUV was parked across my driveway. She was waiting for me, arms folded, frustration written across her face. "Marissa, we had an understanding," she said. "You left us in a terrible situation this morning." I looked at her calmly. "There was no understanding. There was a schedule you created without asking me." Her jaw tightened. "That class is a hobby. Our careers are serious." That sentence told me everything. In Celeste's mind, her ambitions were responsibilities while mine were hobbies. She had already decided whose dreams mattered. 20 minutes later Nolan arrived, carrying Maya's backpack, and looking exhausted. They followed me inside. Celeste placed a folder on my coffee table. "If you are going to take outside commitments, we need to reconsider our financial planning," she said. "We counted on your childcare. We made decisions based on that." Nolan finally spoke. "Mom, things are expensive. We thought having you nearby meant we could make everything work." I looked from my son to his wife. "You made financial commitments based on work I never promised to perform." Celeste leaned forward. "You live alone in a 3-bedroom house. You do not need another job. Helping your family should be more important than teaching strangers." I felt anger rising, but I kept my voice steady. "Practical planning without consent is not planning, Celeste. It is entitlement." For once, neither of them had an immediate answer. And as they left that evening, I understood that this was only the beginning. Celeste had not simply asked me to babysit. She had decided that my retirement was something her family could use. And if I allowed that decision to stand, there would soon be another schedule, another demand. That evening, after Nolan and Celeste left, my house felt strangely different. The same walls surrounded me, the same garden waited outside, and the same photographs of David and Nolan remained on the shelves, yet something had shifted. I walked through the rooms slowly, remembering the years David and I had spent paying for this home. Every improvement had been earned. Every room carried a piece of our history. Nolan's childhood bedroom had eventually become my botanical studio, filled with dried specimens, gardening books, seed catalogs, and photographs from decades of work. I ran my fingers along the doorframe and wondered how easily my own son had forgotten what it had taken to build the life he now considered available for his convenience. The hardest part was not Celeste's behavior. She was ambitious, organized, and completely convinced that efficiency justified everything. The hardest part was Nolan's silence. He was my son. I had raised him. I had worked through exhausting seasons to give him opportunities one never had. Yet when his wife placed my future inside a binder, he had sat quietly and let her do it. I could forgive ambition. I could even understand financial pressure. What I could not accept was being treated as if my sacrifices had created a permanent obligation. The next morning, I drove to the office of my longtime accountant, Arthur. His office was above an old hardware store downtown, and he had been helping me manage my finances for years. I placed my documents on his desk and asked him to review everything. My pension, investments, savings, mortgage status, and regular expenses were all examined carefully. Arthur adjusted his glasses and gave me a reassuring smile. "Marissa, you are financially independent. You have enough to maintain your home comfortably, enjoy retirement, and travel occasionally. You do not need financial support from Nolan or anyone else." I nodded. I already knew that. I just needed to hear it from someone who could see the numbers without emotion. When I left his office, I felt lighter. I was not trapped. I was not dependent. I was not an aging woman waiting for her children to decide what happened next. I was a woman who had spent 40 years building security for herself. That afternoon, I created my own 6-month calendar. But unlike Celeste's schedule, mine contained choices rather than obligations. I reserved time for my conservatory classes. I registered for a botanical workshop in Chicago. I scheduled volunteer hours at the public library. I marked mornings for gardening and afternoons for reading. I even added blank spaces, because I wanted some hours to remain completely mine. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. The less I chased my family's approval, the stronger I became. Celeste stopped sending calendar invitations. Nolan's calls became shorter. Every Sunday evening he would call, ask about the children, provide a few updates, and then end the conversation awkwardly. I never called back demanding explanations. I never sent apologetic messages. I simply continued living. My conservatory classes became one of the happiest parts of my new life. Twice each week, students gathered to learn about soil, drought-resistant plants, sustainable landscapes, and native species. They listened when I spoke. They asked questions. They thanked me for sharing knowledge accumulated through decades of practical experience. Their respect reminded me that retirement did not mean becoming irrelevant. It meant choosing where my experience would matter. I also protected my relationship with Leo and Maya. I did not punish the children for their parents' behavior. Every Saturday morning, I picked them up for a few hours. We visited the botanical gardens, explored the municipal park, watched butterflies, identified trees, and ate ice cream beside the duck pond. They knew their grandmother loved them. But when noon arrived, I took them home and left. I did not stay to fold laundry. I did not prepare dinner. I did not quietly become the household employee Celeste had imagined. One Saturday, as I handed the children back, Celeste stood in the doorway holding a basket of towels. "You seem extremely busy these days," she remarked. Her words sounded polite, but her tone was not. "It must be nice to have so much free time, while Nolan works 60 hours a week." I smiled. "It is not free time, Celeste. It is my time." Her expression tightened. "You know what I mean. I spent 40 years working full-time and raising Nolan. I earned the right to decide how I spend my days now." She stared at me, then looked away. I knew she was still angry, But I also knew something had changed. She could no longer assume I would automatically obey. Then came Nolan's 36th birthday. Celeste invited me to dinner at their house, telling me it would be a small family celebration. When I arrived, however, I immediately sensed something different. Her parents, Richard and Evelyn, were there. The dining table had been arranged with unusual care. Celeste seemed almost cheerful in a way that made my instincts uneasy. Throughout dinner, she kept smiling at me. Nolan barely spoke. When dessert arrived, Celeste tapped her fork lightly against her glass. Before Nolan blows out his candles, I have some exciting news, she announced. She proudly explained that she had accepted a senior vice president position at her company. The promotion required frequent interstate travel beginning the following month. Everyone congratulated her. Then she reached beside the sideboard and produced several folders. She placed one before her parents, one before Nolan, and one directly in front of me. Nolan and I have developed a long-term family strategy, she said. I did not touch the folder. We are going to make a few changes that will benefit everyone. She smiled. Marissa's house will become the family hub. She will move into our downstairs guest suite so she can handle the children's mornings, homework, and dinners. We can lease her current house and use the income for Leo and Maya's future education. My entire body went still. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Celeste continued, as though she were presenting an exciting business proposal. She had calculated rental income. She had considered a floor plan. She had created a 5-year schedule for my supposed responsibilities. She had even decided that moving me into their basement was somehow a gift. This solves everything, she said. You will not have to maintain such a large property anymore, and you will never be alone. I looked at the folder. I could see the edge of a printed floor plan. Then I looked at Nolan. His face was pale. He knew. He had known about this proposal before I walked through the door. Nolan, I said quietly, did you agree to this? He swallowed. Mom, it makes financial sense. That answer hurt more than anything Celeste had said. I turned back toward her. You have planned my home, my schedule, my responsibilities, and now my living arrangements. Celeste folded her arms. We are trying to give you purpose. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anger had disappeared. What remained was certainty. She had made one mistake that no color-coded binder could repair. She had assumed I would be too grateful, too old, too emotional, or too attached to my grandchildren to say no. She had forgotten one simple fact. I had already spent 40 years learning how to stand on my own. I looked at the folder lying unopened before me and realized that the most insulting part was not the proposal itself. It was the certainty behind it. Celeste had not asked whether I wanted to move. She had not asked whether I wanted to lease my home. She had not asked whether I wanted to become their full-time caregiver. She had simply decided, calculated the benefits, printed the paperwork, and expected me to accept the future she had designed. Around the table, everyone waited for my reaction. Evelyn looked uncomfortable, but remained silent. Richard slowly lifted his wine glass, as if he preferred to disappear behind it. Nolan stared at his dessert plate. Celeste, however, continued smiling, apparently convinced that I would eventually understand how generous she was being. Marissa, she said, there is really no reason to make this emotional. We are giving you a permanent role within the family. You will have purpose. You will be close to the children. We have already handled the difficult details. I let the silence continue for several seconds. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder than before. Then I placed my napkin beside my plate. Celeste, I said, who gave you the authority to decide the future of another grown woman? Her smile disappeared. I continued before she could answer. I own my home. I pay my bills. I manage my finances. I worked for 40 years. I raised a son. I built a career. I survived losing my husband. And through all of that, I never needed anyone to give me permission to live my own life. Celeste's face reddened. That is not what we meant. It is exactly what you meant, I replied. You decided my house could become your family's financial resource. You decided my retirement could become unpaid childcare. You decided my mornings, afternoons, evenings, and even my future residence without asking me a single question. Nolan finally looked up. His expression showed shame, but shame was not enough anymore. Mom, we were only trying to make things easier. I turned toward him. For whom? He had no answer. You and Celeste were trying to make your lives easier by making mine smaller. The room fell completely silent. Celeste shook her head. You are misunderstanding. We are family. Family does not mean ownership, I answered. Being your mother does not make me your employee. Being your children's grandmother does not make me your unpaid nanny. And loving you does not require me to surrender my home. I stood slowly from the table. My house will not be leased. I will not move into your basement. I will not follow a 5-year schedule designed by someone else. And I will not apologize for having a life after retirement. Celeste looked toward Nolan, expecting him to rescue the conversation. He did not. I gathered my coat and walked toward the door. Nolan followed me outside. The night air was cold, and the street was almost empty. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Mom, I am sorry. I looked at him. I saw the little boy I had once carried when he was sick, the teenager I had helped through difficult years, and the adult man standing before me now. I know you are sorry, I said. But an apology is only the beginning. He lowered his head. What do I do? Learn to manage your own household, I answered. Do not build your family's future on the assumption that your mother will sacrifice hers. His eyes filled with embarrassment. I placed my hand briefly on his shoulder. I love you, Nolan. I love Leo and Maya. But love cannot survive where respect disappears. I drove home that night without looking back. For the first time, I did not wonder whether I had been too harsh. I knew I had been fair. In the months that followed, reality forced Celeste and Nolan to make the changes they had avoided. Celeste hired professional childcare. She adjusted her travel arrangements around the responsibilities that came with her promotion. Nolan began handling school pickups, appointments, meals, and household planning himself. Slowly, he became the adult partner he should have been from the beginning. Our relationship did not return to exactly what it had been before. Some distance remained, and perhaps that was healthy. They visited during holidays, but they called first. They knocked before entering. They stopped assuming that my home was automatically available to them. Celeste eventually stopped trying to manage my schedule. She never became my closest friend, but she learned a lesson I had hoped she would understand without being forced to learn it. Respect cannot be demanded through organization. It has to be earned through consideration. My relationship with the grandchildren remained warm. Every Saturday, Leo and Maya visited my garden. We planted sunflower seeds, watered tomatoes, searched for insects, and watched the seasons change. They never needed to know about the arguments between adults. They only needed to know that their grandmother loved them. And I wanted them to grow up understanding that loving family does not mean controlling family. My own life continued to expand. Tuesday and Thursday mornings belonged to the conservatory. Students arrived with notebooks and questions, and I taught them everything I had learned through decades of working with plants and landscapes. My garden became more beautiful with every season. The dogwood trees bloomed. The tomato vines grew heavy with fruit. The quiet spaces in my calendar became something I treasured instead of something I feared. One spring afternoon, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea while Leo and Maya laughed near the garden. Sunlight moved through the branches above us, and for a moment I thought about the binder Celeste had brought months earlier. She had tried to divide my life into colored boxes. She had tried to assign every hour a purpose. She had believed an empty calendar meant an available woman. But she had been wrong. An empty calendar can mean freedom. A quiet house can mean peace. Retirement can mean possibility rather than obligation. And a grandmother can love her family deeply without surrendering herself to them. I looked across my garden and smiled. I had not been given this life. I had built it. Nobody had the right to take ownership of something they had never worked to create. My future was not a family asset. It was not a childcare solution, a rental opportunity, or a convenient backup plan. It was mine. And when someone asked me who gave me the right to decide how I would spend the rest of my life, the answer was beautifully simple. I did.